Well, spring is here and things are happening in abundance. I'm not even sure what kind of a tree that one is. These are rhododendrons up at my house. And the first little bit here, I'm going to show you some pretty flowers and talk about those a bit. But the content of this video is really about Japanese maples, and then I'm going to go into some Modesto Ash. Oh, look at that apple tree in full bloom. You can only imagine how many apples are going to come out of this tree. This is a tree I actually worked on last year that split. A big branch broke off, so I had to cut it back kind of hard. So I was quite happy to see it in full bloom, but I'm not going to show you the structure of the tree because it's really on its last few years of life. But dealing with fruit trees is often about babying them along as long as you can. Oh, this is a cool tree. This is a horse chestnut and a rose, and we're into the Japanese maples. This is what I really wanted to talk about. This particular tree was pruned by gardeners or inexperienced tree guys in the past, and a lot of times I get up into a tree and I can see the results of past pruners. Look at that cut. If you look at it closely, they came too close and then they came in with a chainsaw and cut straight down into it. And that's only going to lead to long-term decay for this whole section of the tree. That was just reckless. And so I'm up in the tree. I'm up off of the 16-foot ladder here. This isn't an easy tree to climb. And looking around, you see all kinds of evidence of branches in decline. This has a lot of fungus on the branch, which is never a good sign. Those little white brackets there are the sign that this limb is declining. And a lot of times you'll see a branch that's still leafed out, but you can see evidence of significant decline. And here's the upper canopy of this tree. This tree is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. These people planted this tree over 40 years ago, and they love it. But unfortunately, they had somebody in the past that really didn't know what they were doing, and they caused irreparable damage. All these limbs here were what I took out of the tree. This is all the limbs that were either completely dead or dying. And I was worried about what the tree would end up looking like. So it took me quite a while to trim this tree because, a lot of what I was doing was decision making, getting down, stepping back, looking at it. And so this is what it looked like after I was all done. It actually looks pretty good, but this is just from the one side that had the majority of the foliage. But from the inside, looking up, it was pretty sparse. So I told him I did the best I could do with the situation I had. Now, what is the big issue with Japanese maples anyway? There's a disease called Verticillium Wilt. I'll get to that more later, but I wanted to show you this branch. This tree is defying gravity. This is a Chinese elm. And I actually looked at this tree last year, but this individual branch grows out horizontally for 40 feet without any additional support. And I just think this is truly remarkable. So let's get back to yet another Japanese maple. This one isn't near as big as the last one, but it was also full of Verticillium wilt. And Verticillium wilt is a soil-borne fungus that gets into the system of the tree, but it seems to show itself from the top down. I'm not exactly sure how it runs up through the system of the tree. I've read as much as I can on it, but do you see this dark discoloration here on the cut-off limbs? That is the Verticillium wilt within the system of the tree. And a lot of these branches were half dead and half alive, and I looked very closely, and you can see kind of a blackening on the outside of the limbs that is an indicator that the Verticillium wilt is spreading through that branch. So whenever possible, I try to cut it back. See, that's beyond the wilt in the branch. If you can cut it back beyond that, sometimes that kind of halts it. You can see here all the blackening on this limb. There was a fresh cut. I got beyond that cut. But if you look at the rest of this limb, you can see that it is entirely dead. I'm no expert on Verticillium wilt, Matter of fact, I have to continually read up on any problem that I seem to identify, and I continually learn. But, you know, this is a community of like-minded tree people, arborists from all over the world, and I know one of you guys out there knows a hell of a lot more about Verticillium wilt than I do. So comment. Tell us all what you know. Guns in the distance. Mountain life. And it happened pretty fast. So this tree, there was so much up there that I had to take out that I warned the client that it might not be too attractive when it's all done. You can see that it's just leafing out right now, but a lot of these limbs were not showing much promise whatsoever. So I have to make these decisions. So I'm looking at a lot of these branches, and you can see in some cases there is bark missing, or possibly from sun scald. There's a lot of reasons why the bark can be damaged like this, but this whole section of the tree there had to come out. Now this branch is interesting. It's fully leafed out and green, but I looked at it close and made the decision to cut it off, and you can see why. There's virtually only 20% of the life left in this branch supporting all that foliage. So even though it's green, the future is not there. All right, let's get on to another job. This is a Modesto Ash that we had to remove. It got failure in the storm. I don't know if you remember from years ago, I talked about a little invention that I came up with, converting a pitchfork into a human-powered plow, and here we're using it again. Great tool. Highly recommend it. So I'm doing the removal. I'm up in the bucket truck, and I'm looking around the tree, and I see all kinds of weaknesses and cracks. And you have to understand each species that you're working with. Now, there's a lot of different varieties of ash, but this particular cultivar, called the Modesto Ash, is recognized for splitting limbs. It's also susceptible to termites. It's susceptible to carpenter ants and fungus and all kinds of problems. But this tree ripped off a huge limb, and they opted to get rid of it. So we ended up cutting up all the firewood. Fortunately, I found a friend who was in need of firewood, and he came out and picked it all up for us. You know, if you ask 10 different tree guys to give their idea of what the same tree might need, you're very likely going to get 10 different ideas or 10 different ways of pruning the tree. Now, the big however is, when I get into a situation, I like to thoroughly inspect all the wounds and try to identify any weaknesses. It's also imperative that you understand the strengths and weaknesses of the individual species, in this case Modesto Ash, that you're trying to evaluate. Now, I know that this species is recognized for limb failures. It's also recognized for excessive areas of decay. It gets carpenter ants, and it also gets termites. This particular tree has a deck around it, so I cannot inspect the root flare, but it appears that there is a bit of root flare on the surface here, so I'm hoping that there isn't anything going on down there, but that's hard to inspect without pulling up the boards. But one thing I did notice right off the bat was this main crotch here, and there was a collective of leaves inside. I always pay attention to things like that, and sometimes you'll actually see a different type of a plant, or a seed has fallen in there. You'll get a different type of a tree or a plant in there. So I always keep a bit of baling wire with me to inspect these things, because it's an easy way to probe. And I pushed it all the way down, and I want you to see just how deep this goes. So we've got about 18 to 20 inches from this point right here down to here. So I was able to deduce through physical inspection that this crotch has a weakness that goes down at least 18 inches. That was what I could find just by probing that one area. So I can see that this crotch may be weak, and there may be a possibility of a future split. So today I think my objective is going to be get some weight off, at least on this side of the tree over the house. Okay, so I showed you just how far this probe went in, about 18 inches or so. So it's really easy to jump to a conclusion and say, oh, this tree's got to go. You know, well, does it really have to go? There is a problem there. The people really appreciate the shade. You know, they built a deck around the tree. They've lived with the tree for, I think they said 25 years or more. And they don't want to lose it. So if we can make the tree safer and bring it to their attention so they keep up on it, you know, it's very, very likely that this tree will go on for a long time without any problems, any serious problems. But let's say, what's the worst case scenario? And I brought this to their attention too. The tree is medium size, it's not excessively large, so if there was a failure, it would not likely be catastrophic. You know, the side towards the house would cause the most possible damage, so if we can lighten that up. This side over here, I guess it could go down, but I mean, it'll probably damage the trellis and the fence and things like that, but it wouldn't be likely a life-threatening type of a failure. So you have to take all these things into consideration and do the best job you possibly can. But above all, you've got to inform your client as to what you find so they can make educated decisions about the tree that they own.